Wasn't that great? Thanks, Nick. I learned a lot during this session. So next up, we have Dan Park, who has a history of bringing businesses to Canada. A good example of that is Uber Eats. So he was the first general manager of Uber Eats. So every evening when you order, think of him. Have like a moment where you silently thank him for what he has done so that you don't have to spend too much time thinking about dinner. That's all because of him. In this session, he's not going to talk about that. He will talk about his current startup, Clutch. And he's going to basically share about the challenges that he faced with Clutch being the first online car retailer in Canada as he manages the peaks and valleys of hypergrowth. So please give it up for Dan Park.
Hello. All right. So when I found out that I was speaking at Collision, my marketing team was like, you need a sizzle video. And I was like, really? Do I need a sizzle video? And then they put that together, and I said, that was awesome. We absolutely need a sizzle video because it makes us look like we're doing amazing. The truth is, it's not always amazing. And that graph that said 2,000% growth, well, it's actually a bit misleading. And same goes with any of the other branded videos that you're going to see at this conference and the fundraising headlines that you'll see in the news. And I'm here to change that narrative around scaling startups and show you that the picture, in reality, is a little bit more complicated. And hopefully this will not only help you manage the peaks and valleys in your own business, but also read these stories with a little bit more of a critical eye. And while I certainly didn't expect what's happening in the macroeconomic environment, I think this talk is even more relevant today than it was maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So to start, I spent hours trying to come up with a slide or a graph that showed how people generally think about growth. And it actually is pretty linear. And why is that? It's because CEOs like myself have these massive egos, and we want to tell you that everything is going well all the time. So for private companies, there's no obligation to report anything to the public. And so the only time private companies really say anything about their companies is when things are going really, really well. So basically all the time. But that's not necessarily true. The second is time. So over a longer time horizon, things can look surprisingly up and to the right. So I spent 5 years in venture capital, investing in early stage companies, and almost every single growth stage startup that was successful had a graph that looked something like that. I was also the GM of Uber Eats in Canada for 3 years, and when I started back in 2016, it was a very small business. By the time I left, we were delivering 1 million meals a week. And Clutch is following a somewhat similar trajectory. But if you zoom out far enough, it's really easy to ignore the daily, or weekly, or even monthly setbacks that you'll see as a startup. And this graph certainly doesn't talk to you about how I was lying on the living room floor in the fetal position thinking about how to shut down my company because we were 3 weeks out of cash. So here's a great example on an even more exaggerated scale. This is a 10-year period from 1997 to 2008. It doesn't look super amazing, lots of ups and downs. Can anyone guess who this company is? Anyone? All right. It's actually Amazon. So every time I look at this chart, it actually blows me away. If you were an employee of Amazon in the early 2000s, all you saw was the stock price jump between 25 and 75. And I've spoken to people at Amazon during this time, and for them, growth didn't feel linear. But again, if you zoom out, the average person tends to ignore that 10-year period and thinks of Amazon as a pretty up and to the right success story. So the reality is, when you take away the optics and you take away the long time horizons, growth is actually quite the roller coaster ride. There are upticks, there are flat lines, there are setbacks, and there are phases and stages to growth. And that seems to be the case for nearly every single successful startup out there. And so rather than following a linear trajectory, you should in fact deliberately manage startups to an S-curve like the one you're seeing over there. So why is that? Why is it that growth can't be linear? Well, it's because every time a business doubles, I think it breaks. I've seen the businesses I manage double multiple times, and almost all the time it seems that the tipping point at which things start breaking is when they double. And that's because as things grow, and as the processes that were designed for a smaller number of customers or a slower growth rate, a slower velocity of growth start breaking. Systems, org structures, software, and even hardware, these all start breaking if you put too much pressure on them. And as a result, growth tends to slow down. So here's an example. I showed you a lot of charts showing Clutch's growth up and to the right. But this is a shorter timeline, and even though we've grown 2,000% over the last 3 years, that number is just a number calculated from point to point. It doesn't really account for the big dips that we had in July and October, and certainly not the really big one in December. So what happened? Well, late last year, our production capacity simply wasn't keeping up with demand. People wanted their cars, but we didn't have enough technicians, vehicle inspectors, or parking capacity, and our production capacity was breaking. So we started to accumulate this massive backlog of cars that were sold, but not yet delivered to customers. So things break. They collapse under their own weight, and as a result, progress either plateaus or dips. And this kind of non-linearity is inevitable. What matters is how you respond. So if you keep pushing for linear growth, even when things start breaking, they're just going to break even more. If you acknowledge that growth is linear, and if you appreciate that the plateaus are dips, then you can take advantage of these times, focus on your fundamentals, and fix the foundation to prepare you for the next phase of growth. So in other words, you got to slow down to speed up. So to illustrate what I mean, this is a chart showing sessions, website sessions to deposits on cars. And I think I insulted my head of marketing when I said, oh my God, I can't believe marketing is working. What I meant to say was, oh my God, I can't believe marketing is working so quickly. To get an individual to purchase a $30,000 item online and have that marketing translate into sales was pretty surprising to me, at least. Probably less so to Whitney. And so what started to happen was that we got this massive backlog of cars, which almost tripled over the course of a matter of weeks. And so I had to personally email a bunch of customers, 400 customers in fact, and tell them, look, like, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get your cars on the given date because we just had this massive backlog. What we could have done is continue to pour on the demand, continue to try to force growth, ask people to run double shifts, just pull all-nighters, and that's kind of what you would do in a high-growth environment. But we took the conscious decision to stop marketing, pull back that demand so we can focus on some of those fundamentals. And while it's painful and inefficient to do, it actually ended up being stronger and better for the business. So, if you feel things starting to break, and if you don't take a pit stop to change your tires, make mechanical adjustments, and refuel, I can guarantee you that things will break. So, how do you know? How do you know when to come in for a pit stop in the first place? How do you know when there's too much pressure on your system? It all comes down to metrics. You need to pick the metrics to tell you when you're braking. And so to stay on theme with the car metaphor, ultimately you need to establish your own speedometer to tell you that you're going too fast. So for us, the speedometers are gross margin, NPS, or Net Promoter Score, and headcount per unit. And when any of these cross a certain line, this is the cue for us to slow down and at least evaluate where things stand. And so back in late last year, we raised $75 million and started really scaling up our team. We hired over 200 people over the course of 6 months, and at the end of last year, almost 65% of our employee base had less than 6 months of tenure. So what you created was crazy inefficiencies. We had new people hiring new people, we had managers training those new people, we all were trying to figure out how to work together, so super inefficient. And while this is normal and expected, when exactly do you hit pause? For us, it was that headcount per unit metric. And so when we saw that decline by 50%, that was the point in time where we paused hiring, took the time to learn to work with each other, and really start to build the processes and org structures so we can avoid throwing more people at the problem. So we slowed down so we could speed up again. So, as you leave this conference today and go back to your day jobs, I hope you take 2 things away from the last 10 minutes. First, don't expect growth to be linear. If you expect growth to be linear, I can guarantee you'll be disappointed, because it's simply not. The second, which is more important, maybe a little bit even harder to do, is deliberately not be looking for linear growth. You should intentionally make sure it isn't. These plateaus and downturns aren't just unhappy side effects of growth, they're actually essential to long-term success. Growth will just have its ups and downs, and if you don't plan for growth in a linear fashion, you'll end up going through these peaks and valleys that unfortunately you won't be able to handle. So that means deliberately picking the metrics that can help you throttle growth, because at the end of the day, it's much better to slow down on your own terms than being forced to stop when everything around you starts breaking. Thank you.